Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. If you are listening to this episode on the release date, it is actually Christmas Day. We hope that we appreciate the chance to be relevant, but we hope this is not the first thing you're waking up and doing on Christmas morning. With that, if for the first time ever you're listening to our podcast, the Growth Project is produced by AMPLOS and the AMPLOS team. We are a performance psychology firm, practice in Greenville, South Carolina. We exist to help you be better and pursue better. And this podcast is intended to be informational and inspirational. And hopefully we bring topics to you and guests to you that are relevant in your life so you can figure out, hey, what it means to you and how you can put them into practice. So today on this Christmas episode, I've got Dr. Cory Shaffer. Welcome, Dr. Shaffer.
Good to be here.
And I'm Milt Lowder. I don't think I ever introduced myself. So Cory, you just got back from Pennsylvania, back seeing your family. So when you think about Christmas and Christmas traditions, what are some of the highlights you remember, and what was it like to connect with your family this past weekend?
Obviously it was great to see family. It was good to get back home. This is the first time I had been back to Pennsylvania in, I think, 2 years, which is, just a long time. Kind of life gets in the way and it's challenging to do that these days. In terms of like traditions and stuff, the stage of life that I'm in now, with a toddler, a 1-year-old at home. So just, sort of fresh in the parent game, so to speak. I think we're still figuring some of that stuff out, and I think when I do think about just more broadly Christmas traditions and so on, it's just, it's kind of changed so much over the years because, growing up and living in my parents' house my entire life, it's like, right, you kind of do the same thing year after year. But then it's like, all right, now you go off to college or grad school and you're kind of just coming in for a few days at that point or for a week. And now it's like, I can't tell you the last time I was home on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
Because now I have my own family and we're trying to, as you mentioned there, just like establish our own traditions and what does this look like for us, and wanting, our kids to wake up on Christmas morning in their own bed at their own house. And so, that's again, just sort of the stage of life that we're in. But the evolution of that, when you kind of just think back and everybody obviously can reflect a little bit here, just what have your Christmas traditions look like and how have they evolved over the years? So how about you?
Yeah, I think one that's so well said, and it's kind of why we're talking about this podcast. I mean, the title of the podcast, finding harmony, holiday harmony, navigating work and rest. And I think when I think about Christmas traditions and that evolution, one of the reasons we don't find harmony, we try to hold on and recreate what we had growing up. Or we're constantly reminded, I work with a lot of people in my own life, our holiday traditions were disrupted after my parents' divorce when I was 19 years old. And one of the most painful experiences of my life I can remember is going home my freshman year at Clemson. And, we go to the Christmas Eve service the night before, and my mom and sister and little brother or an aunt are on one side of the church, and my dad and I are on the other. And my older brother was married, so he was with his wife's family. And we left that, and my dad and I go back to the house in the country, and he goes to bed about 9 o'clock, and I'm sitting there on Christmas Eve, my first one ever without my family. And, you go back to those earlier childhood memories and that tradition of you got to open one present, and here's a holiday meal, and here's Christmas meal, and that was disrupted. And adjusting to that and the evolution of that, and then how do you get married and you have kids, and as y'all are trying to do, what are those traditions we want? And so I think it's filled with a lot of joy, but I know I'm not the only one that looks back on some of the Christmas seasons and memories, and there's some pain involved with that, as well as the pressure of work and life and expectations of what this holiday season should be like. And I think that's why we want to talk about it today. I love the title that Connor came up with for us, that holiday harmony, because it's something that we all feel pressure to have, but it's one that very few people actually experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and ultimately what we're trying to do here is harmony. Maybe another word for that is just balance. And when you're really thinking about work-life balance, that's kind of what this is. We're focused a little bit more here on, in particular, rest during the holiday time period. But it's just a challenge, I think it's hard to do 365 days a year. So to think that we can just do it, in over a couple of days or a week over the holidays, maybe a little bit of a fool's errand, but I think it's something that's worth talking about and something we can all get better at. So I think as we were talking about this, Milt, or as we were prepping for this, one of the things that, popped up in our conversation really quickly was just kind of the continuum that people can end up being on. It's like on the one hand, you have these people who, despite the fact that it is the holidays and probably should be prioritizing a little bit more family time and slowing down and kind of hitting the reset button, they just never slow down.
Yeah.
They don't ever stop. And then on the other end of the continuum, way on the opposite extreme, you have the people who pretty much when Thanksgiving rolls around, not even Thanksgiving Day, like Thanksgiving week, essentially, they've just been in coast mode and cruise control for the last month, and will probably continue to be that way through the new year.
Yes.
So if those are our two ends of the continuum that a lot of people end up falling in, that's where we wanted to start here, is just, that contrast. And I guess just, why does that happen? How does that happen? Let's explore each of those. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, let's start on the end of the one that never slows down, the one that never shuts it down. And I think, as you said, that's so hard. 365, a lot of the people we work with are in a high-performance business, a high-stakes business, and they're constantly in go mode. And so they don't know how to slow down and disengage on a regular day, on a regular week, that much less likely as life hasn't slowed down for them. Mm-hmm. Now you've got more obligations. I was talking to a friend this morning, and families coming in, having to relocate a family member. Children are coming in from different areas. He's in a business that this time of the year, they're trying to close the year. Mm-hmm. And so just constant pressure, constant stress. And I think that's what kind of ramps and accelerates that end of the spectrum where you never slow down. There's only so much time you have to get things done. And that acceleration, that pressure to have to get it all done, I think that's where a lot of people find themselves. And how many companies we work with that at the end of the month, I mean, I have some companies I work with, there's no PTO on the end of the month. Mm-hmm. And so the end of the year, that last week of the year, there's no PTO. And so work never changes. And so I think that's why you can find yourself. And I know I'm kind of talking a little bit more here. Another group that falls in that category, that the holidays become a reminder of what they don't have. And if they just can get really busy, they don't have to slow down and address the pain, address the hurt, address the challenges. So I can just speed through and just work myself to death, mm-hmm. that I don't have time to slow down and really process what is lacking in my life.
Sure. Almost, I mean, you kind of told the story for yourself, but they don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be sitting around on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, and sitting with the emotion that might come up with, that time period.
And I don't blame them. I don't want to go back to being 19, 20 years old, sitting there on Christmas Eve in Oswego, South Carolina, and a house I'd really never been in. Mm-hmm. And so whatever I can do. And so hopefully maybe the worst thing you're doing is work, but what do a lot of people turn to is some type of substance, some type of addiction, something to numb themselves from the pain even more.
Yeah, and I feel like last year, Drew and I even did a podcast around this time period, and it was something along the lines of just how much opportunity there is and can be, focusing on the other end of that continuum just for a second, because it's so easy for so many people to slow down. There really is and can be opportunity to sort of get a leg up on the competition. So in some ways, there's just this group of hard charging people who think that this is just an opportunity to kind of separate from the pack. Yeah. And there is truth to that. That was the core of our podcast about a year ago, was just like, hey, how do you kind of nail the end of the year? And, it was, hey, stay on schedule and stay in routine and rhythm and focus on your goals and this and that. And because so many other people are just being average and taking their foot off the gas, you're automatically kind of creating some separation. And there's absolutely truth to that. it's just, we're talking about the extremes
Yes,
of that.
yeah. The extremes of I either shut it down completely. I
Yeah.
never think about work. I never go in the office. I don't even follow up on email.
Right.
Versus I even accelerate even more. I go even harder because I do look at that competition. I can create separation.
Yep.
Where we're talking about is that balance, where that harmony. And of course, my mind goes to a quote. I love what Jim Lair said, that we live in a world that celebrates work and productivity, ignores renewal and recovery, and fail to recognize that both are necessary for peak performance. And I think the check-in for all of us, before we kind of go any further, I guess we didn't describe the other end of the spectrum, though. So the people that are the end that just shut it down, what do we tend to see there? What tends to happen?
Yeah, I mean, again, I've worked with a handful of organizations who, let's say, sales type organizations, and this can be especially true for those individuals. Let's say if you already hit your annual goal, Thanksgiving rolls around the end of November, and you've got the holidays on the horizon, whatever holidays you're celebrating, but let's just, Christmas and New Year's and so on. It can be so easy for that group to completely just kind of kick their feet up, probably do a lot of busy work over that final 5 weeks of the year to sort of appear as if they're being productive. But in reality, their kind of day-to-day habits have changed. They've really taken the foot off the gas. There's just a tendency to feel like, I don't know, maybe I've earned.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I've earned this time period where I can just kind of kick my feet up and, I'll get after it again in January. And certainly understand where that comes from. But I also don't think that's maybe the most productive way of approaching this season.
Yeah, go back to that self-talk. I've earned, or I hear a lot of time, well, this is what I deserve. And so you talk yourself into, well, I'm just going to shut it down. Mm-hmm. I deserve this. I've been going really hard. I don't have a good plan for taking care of myself. I'm not intentional about how I'm spending that time. I just am going to mentally shut it down. Mm-hmm. And as you said earlier, as we were prepping, well, what tends to happen? And then you lie to yourself, well, hey, first week of January, I'm going to get dialed in. And you've ignored 5 or 6 weeks of developing your pipeline, of developing a supply of business. And so then for the first quarter of 2025,
you're just playing catch up.
Yeah. We see it at the end of the month for all our sales organizations. There's a huge ramp up to the finish. Mm-hmm. And then it's a human nature just to take a breath.
Yep.
And then they're playing catch up again. And we never break the habit or the cycle. And so too much of a good thing is still too much. And so at either end of the spectrum, we're trying for you to challenge yourself today. Well, are you the one that doesn't slow down, that kind of tries to accelerate even further, the pressure, the expectations, even maybe running from the pain? Or if you hit your number, hit your goal, or realize as you're in a line of work that maybe is not very productive for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And you just have already mentally talked yourself into going through the motions. And we aren't saying either one is bad, but on any extreme, that's where it can be a detrimental to what we're trying to accomplish and who we're trying to become.
Right. So the spirit of this podcast is, again, how do we find better harmony there? So that's where we'll start to shift the conversation here. And I think, the preface to this, at least from my perspective, is if you want to be better at this, during this last month of the year, you should be striving to be better at this around the year as well. But focusing more specifically here around the holidays, Milt, where do we start?
Yeah, to me, I just always default to, when I think about this time of year, and I go back to our clinical practice and just my own experiences I mentioned, the holidays in general can be a really difficult time for a lot of people. December is a time of increased levels of anxiety, depression. If I remember correctly on the data, November, December is a time of suicides, a higher number of suicide attempts. And so that piece, it becomes a constant reminder. What makes healing and dealing with trauma and going through life so difficult is we have these constant reminders. And I think social media has only exaggerated this on a consistent basis, but especially around the holidays, there's a picture of how we should feel and how we should be doing. We don't want this podcast to come across this way as well, that this is what you should be doing. And so it's mainly constantly reminded of what I should be doing that I'm not doing, or what I should be experiencing that I'm not experiencing, that I should be with family. My wife and I went out of town this past weekend for anniversary, and the Uber driver on the way to the airport yesterday he moved out to Nevada, and his one reason why is he didn't have ties anywhere else. And we were talking about Nevada and work, and he rode by. He said, "Well, a lot of the old hotels have been converted to condominiums, and actually that's where I'm living right there." And it was a hotel that became a condominium, and he has 0 friends. He has 0 connections, and that's really difficult. Mm-hmm. My wife and I got on the plane, and we're like, man, we're just grateful we have family, people that care about us. And so to me, when I think about both ends of the spectrum and whatever's driving that, to me, that language, Cory, about giving yourself permission to be human. And so when we talk about that, what does that mean? Give yourself permission to be human.
First and foremost, what comes to mind is just like allow yourself or give yourself the freedom to experience whatever emotions, are kind of popping up, sort of normalizing that's okay.
Yes.
And not getting yourself stuck in a headspace where, as you described, you feel the need to be something or do something else.
Yeah.
That's really what summarizes it for me. And I know, again, without the clinical background, you probably have, or for me, like that's just what comes to mind. You probably have more depth to it than that. So what would you add to that?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I think part of what we know is we tend to be our own worst critic, and we judge ourselves sometimes in a favorable light, but especially this time of year, we're very judgmental of what we should be doing and how we need to be acting and what we should be feeling. And I think giving yourself permission to be human means to normalize. When we had people dealing with traumatic events, one of the first things we do is we walk through, hey, here's some common responses to uncommon events. And normalizing was a word you used, that this is part of the human experience. And giving yourself permission, what that means is to accept the pain, to accept the challenges, to accept the struggles, to accept the demands that are placed upon you, and accepting the limits. That's what I talk about. How do I accept the limitations of being human without accepting the limits that being human imposes upon us? Mm-hmm. To me, that's one of the great challenges of life. Like, we have so many limitations of being human, and so part of this is this time of finding harmony. Permission to be human is a self-assessment of where you really are. What's driving your behavior? What's really important to you? Whose life are you trying to live? And I think that's like the busy side of things is I'm trying to keep up with a standard or an expectation, or I'm running from the pain, whatever is driving that, because of the obligations, because of what is my vision and my purpose. So being human means to really reflect and say, well, why is that so important to me? And what void is that filling in my life? And if you're on the other end of why is it about your personality that I think I deserve to shut it down, that I just like to go on autopilot, that I use this time as a year just to really, what I see on that end of the spectrum are just some mind-numbing activities without purpose, without intention. And so that being human to me means, how can I process these emotions? How can I challenge myself? How can I be honest with myself? And how can I connect meaningfully with other people? Part of being human is loneliness has become an epidemic. I think the reason the holidays can be so difficult for people to find balance is a lot of people are lonely.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'm going to add here, I guess as you were talking, I thought about it. Permission to be human. Well, as humans, you have a choice. And so you certainly have the permission to feel whatever it is that you want to feel. If there's a sense of loneliness, or if you're kind of reflecting on what once was, or sitting in this space where a lot of negative emotion can be conjured up during this time of year, like that's okay. And you're allowed to feel that. But you also have a choice to make. Absolutely. On, is that going to be your focus? Is that where you're putting all of your attention and energy? Or can you allow yourself to do that, but then still make the choice to shift to, but hey, I still have a lot to be grateful for.
Yes. That freedom to be human means that freedom to choose. And means when I experience that, I don't have to stay there. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be like this. That I get to choose of how I want to be, and how do I try to find that balance. I mean, one of the most powerful clients I ever worked with, she had been through so much trauma in her life. And her words to me, Cory, were constantly, that was my life, this is my life. That was my life, this is my life. Means I've accepted the change, the challenges, the pain, the discomfort, the hurt, but I'm not going to continue to live in reaction to those. I'm going to choose to live differently. And I think that being a human piece means I just don't have to accept it.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah. And
even
like I accept the limitations,
Sure.
but I don't accept those limits. We want to constantly challenge the paradigm that we've created in our mind.
Yeah, again, just because you're a hard-charging, goal-oriented person doesn't mean you still have a choice.
Yes.
Right? Like I don't have to be that right now if I don't want to be, or just because I've had the tendency in the past to kind of coast, I don't have to entirely shut it down. Like I can still be engaged at work and so on. So that piece, as you were talking a minute ago, it just reminded me like, well, being human, you still have,
Yes.
The power to choose what you want to be. Okay. So Milt, to summarize this idea of giving yourself permission to be human, what's the action item around that?
Yeah, to me, I'll use something that you do so well as just a chance to reflect and understand what's driving the behavior in one extreme or the other, and how consistent with that is what you want for your life. And I love this language, getting back that freedom to be human, but also the freedom to choose, painting a picture of how you want it to be, what's really important to you. And I think part of clarifying what you really want in life with understanding that now I know what I want, I know what I'm willing to give up, and I will give up some of the things I'm holding on to that are holding me back. Will I choose forgiveness? Understanding forgiveness will lead to freedom, that I don't let the things I can't control me. So those are some of the ideas I have about it, of having the courage to really address a situation and understand where you are, but then choosing where do you want to go forward and how do you want it to be going forward.
Mm-hmm. Let's move forward then. So just another way I think that people can find some harmony here, right? And navigating work and rest and doing so with a little bit more purpose. The word that came to mind to me in brainstorming for this was boundaries.
Yeah.
And put very, very simply, I think that's when you're at work, be at work, and when you're at home, be at home. Now, I can put that simply. That doesn't mean that's a simple thing to accomplish. Yes. To be very, very clear about that. But the idea that just wherever you're at, being present, I think that's the point.
And that's where life happens, and that's where performance takes place. And I think right now we live in a world where it's really hard to be present. Mm-hmm. Life is going on around us, and there, maybe if you have children, they're out of school now, and that's a disruption in terms of the calendar and the schedule that you keep. And you've got family coming into town, or you're traveling to see family. And so it's this constant busyness that you aren't really ever mindful of the words that I'm thinking about or intentional about how am I spending my time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think this probably leans, especially for those people, in the direction of, hard charging and not slowing down. Giving yourself, give yourself permission to be out of the office a little bit more. Being mindful of I don't have to be on my phone, constantly. I don't have to be checking my email every hour on the hour. That's one of the simplest things I think, especially if you're a parent around this time of year, and you just said maybe your kids are home and they're a little bit more present now, but are you present with them? Because I think there are probably a lot of parents this time of year, as you know, just because of the busyness and so on, or because of the industry they're in, they're getting more time with their kids, but is it really truly quality time, or is it just spent with mom or dad sitting there on their phone or on their iPad answering emails or taking work calls and so on? So that's what I mean by boundaries. And again, if you're at home, be at home. Yeah. You shouldn't have the work phone out.
That was language. I know we said give yourself permission to be human, but that language to me has really helped me over the years to disengage from work. You know what grad school is like. You can be working on something 24/7. You can work on your dissertation. I remember when Jay was born, though, in Kentucky, I gave myself permission to not do work on Saturday. I just was, and so I'd pick it up on Sunday when the kids were little, and we'd work hard till 5:30 or 6, and you get home at 6:30. I would give myself permission to not do anything work related for a couple of hours until they got into bed. And so that language of being able to disengage, and I think that's really important. But I also think your environment, you can be a leader if you're leading a group of people. I've got one leader that I work with who I would say is very hard charging, very ambitious, and he's created a policy. I guess unless it's absolutely necessary, there aren't work emails that go out Friday after 6 o'clock and until Monday morning at 7.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was the one who taught me how to do the schedule send thing on Outlook, and so to be present at work, sometimes we need a little bit of help, and so changing the environment can help you be a little bit more present at work. So then you can disengage and be present at home.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think very simple things here, kind of low-hanging fruit. If you're going to be out of the office for an extended period of time, putting out of office email up,
Yeah.
right? Sort of an automatic reply, limiting the notifications on your phone, that kind of stuff. I do think, because I mentioned like we're so focused here on sort of the outside of work stuff and giving yourself permission to be present,
Yeah.
and so on, but when you are at work, I think it is important, and what can be helpful here is as I mentioned, setting boundaries. Like when you're at work, be present. What do you do? Well, stay goal-oriented,
Yes.
right? Stay task-oriented. If you use a to-do list around the year, just because the calendar says December, like you can still have a to-do list, believe it or not. So maintaining some of that, I think for maybe those individuals who tend to check out or get into coast mode, it's setting boundaries on almost like, let's just say you're out of the office and you're going to be out of the office for an extended time period. We were joking here because I mentioned going, I was home for three and a half days, and just how quickly you get out of rhythm and out of routine and diet goes out the window. And then, I'm not working out for a couple of days. But you can still set boundaries on, like, I'm not going to let myself fully get away from some of the things that make me feel like who I am.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know what it was like for you. I was gone. We left Friday afternoon, came back, late last night. I got home around 11:30. And man, and this morning, just being off for a couple of days, and it really was just a weekend. I hit the road this morning. I got to the office early, and there were so many things I had to do. And so imagine if you shut down for a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, and you multiply that 3 or 4 weeks. Imagine January 6th, what that's going to feel like.
Right.
And so it may enjoy the change of pace that I think this season can provide, but I like what you said. How do I prioritize? What am I trying to accomplish? What are the key behaviors that I want to engage in? I want to make sure I check the box on to really keep the ball moving, so I'm not either all in or all out.
Yeah, and I think again, this will lead us into our I guess kind of third take-home message or action item here. But it's sort of like, I'm going to use this language and I sort of ingest, but like you got to set boundaries on your laziness almost, right? Like just because it's the week between Christmas and New Year, like time still does exist.
Yeah.
You don't have to stay in bed for 12 hours. You are allowed to go to the gym during that time period. You can eat Christmas cookies, but you don't have to eat a dozen of them. Right? Like that's what I mean is like set some boundaries for yourself on, hey, just because I'm giving myself the permission to be human, just because I'm present, it doesn't mean I have to completely let myself go and get rid of all the healthy habits and so on that just help me be who I am on a normal day to day.
Yeah.
And that's really where we wanted to shift to here. So again, we mentioned some specific action items there around boundaries, but I guess to circle back to that, out of office emails, right? Limiting phone notifications, that kind of stuff, very low hanging fruit.
And for that group, Cory, I would go back to what we talked about. Like, hey, when you have those boundaries, and for the group who has a hard time shutting it down, not only goals for what you want to accomplish, like goals, well, how do you want to show up at home?
Right.
And so think about how you want to be present. If for me, I've got college kids too coming in. Like how do I want that time to be? How do I engage with them? How do I show an interest in them? How do we be joyful in those moments? And so kind of not only the goals at work that are going to keep me going, but the goals for home of how do I want this to really be different? Mm-hmm. And what kind of pace? And if I don't have reminders of that, I just fall back into the habits I've always done.
Right. Yeah. And again, I think when you are in the office, as I mentioned, stick to whatever systems or processes helped get you to this point in the year. That's really aligned with growth mindset principles too. Is I'm looking ahead and knowing that like I'm not just going to completely shut it down, because I know the goal here is just to keep getting better, to continue to improve. I want to set myself up for I'm able to hit the ground running or feel that way when January rolls around and I'm not climbing out of some type of a hole. So again, all those, I think, all these pieces just fit in this idea of boundaries.
Yeah. Engage, disengage,
right,
and use the resources you have to help you with that. Yeah, really good.
And then our final, I guess, action item here around finding harmony is just related to, and we were just alluding to it, but just healthy habits. I think back to some basics. You can use this as an opportunity for a lot of people to, especially that really hard charging group, probably doesn't give themselves permission, again, too often to just get an extra hour of sleep if they have the opportunity to. But just actually to, recharge, rest, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and not very mindful. Or you see kind of that group, like they're hard charging. They are probably not only hard charging at work. And so the holiday season, instead of a time of rest and recovery, but times of I'm going from one party to another. And I tend to drink more, and I tend to eat more, and I tend to sleep less, that I'm going wide open. And so that group never slows down. And their social life is very active. And so they're going from one thing to another. And so that becomes a problem that I lose sight of the things that have helped me maintain that healthy balance, mental and physical and spiritual and emotional, relational and behavioral. I kind of just, all that's out the window because I'm just going so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, again, I mentioned this a couple of minutes ago, but because we get out of rhythm with our normal day to day and out of routine, we can't let the pendulum swing too far in any one direction.
And so, to me, Cory, that like one of the there's some cognitive distortions that we all have. That it's either all or nothing.
Yeah.
And I kind of sometimes that way, even I know it, I can process it cognitively. Like if I'm working out and being active, I'm going to eat a lot better. But I know, like when I don't work out, I should eat even better, but I don't, because in the back of my mind, it's like, well, it doesn't really matter because I'm not working out. And I think that end of the spectrum to where that inertia that has taken place and you aren't working out, you aren't eating well, you aren't productive, it's just so easy to fall into that sense of, well, it doesn't really matter. And then we also lie to ourselves like, well, January 6th, I'm like I'm going to get after it. And you've created for 3 or 4 weeks now really bad habits. And it's hard to stop and create these new habits, because especially if you've taken the week off or the month off, mentally, physically, emotionally, not being present, now you're reacting from a position of weakness and shame and guilt of what you should have been doing that you didn't do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned there just the all or nothing tendency. Remind people all the time, going for a walk around the neighborhood is better than nothing. Right.
I'm struck. I need some coaching on that, because the older I get, I realize that's actually exercise for me. I'm actually walking the dog. That is,
there you go.
I haven't adjusted. I haven't given myself permission to adjust to that yet.
But that's the point, right? Is like, well, people will say, well, normal work week, I'm up at 5 a.m. and I get to the gym before I go into the office and this and that. But because I'm not going to the office now, I sleep a little bit longer. I don't go to the gym, and I kind of just end up doing nothing throughout the day. And if that's the best thing for you, and that's a more conscious decision, then awesome.
Well, conscious, back to your choice.
Correct.
Like if you choose to do that, that's different versus just doing it.
Exactly. And so that's my point. It's like, hey, if you can sleep in a little bit longer, awesome. If you can make it to the gym, awesome. But it doesn't have to be that. There are other ways to kind of check that box and feel like, okay, I didn't just go from 100 to 0.
Yeah.
Just because it's the week between Christmas and New Year's. So the healthy habits piece, again, I think that's just an important reminder for everybody, whether it's healthy for you to slow down or it's healthy for you to kind of maintain pace.
Good.
That's the point here, because if we're too far in either direction, again, probably not best for us.
Yeah, and to me, Cory, I just kind of like all three of our points in finding this holiday harmony is you getting to decide how you want your life to be, and not stop living up to the expectations of how other people think it should be. And I think that's part of sometimes what makes the holidays so difficult is we're trying to keep pace or trying to create or recreate the memories or traditions we had, or we're trying to live up to the expectations of here's what I should be doing for my kids. And so the pressure to perform, the pressure to receive a paycheck, or my dad always shut it down, so I'm going to shut it down. And there's really no intentional thought, and it's not consistent with my vision. It's not consistent with helping me be my best. And we just see the after effect of this in January, that we aren't starting the year off on a good note, and we're just kind of playing catch up again.
Yeah. Yeah, specific to, and I guess this will be the final thing I'll say, specific to the two extremes that we described, I don't think anybody's vision is to be one of those extremes. It's probably somewhere in between there. And that's the point here, is like, you still have the choice during this time frame, during this period, to live according to who you do want to be.
Yes.
And live how you want to live. So being mindful of that as we approach the end of the year here, especially this week when you guys are going to be hearing this, Christmas Day to New Year's Day. You see funny stuff online all the time about like that week. Just people don't know what day it is. They're just so out of rhythm, out of routine. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, and rest and recovery doesn't mean that you, like, for me, it's going to be duck hunting at some point. And so it doesn't mean that you shut it down completely, but you pay attention to what nourishes you and what helps, what's important to you. And you have the courage to live according to that, as you said. And so we think it's really important in terms of finding that harmony to really, like, what does this season mean to you? What does it represent to you? And how do you give yourself permission to truly enjoy it, but still not sacrifice everything you've worked so hard to help you be better mentally and physically and spiritually and emotionally and relationally and behaviorally. And so I really like the 3 points: permission to be human, setting boundaries, engage and disengage. And just hey, when you're at work, be at work. When you're at home, be at home. Wherever you are, be great where your feet are and be present. And then maintain some semblance of healthy habits to help fuel me and sustain me during this time. So we are grateful for you. We hope you have a Merry Christmas. We hope you have a wonderful holiday season. And we look forward to an awesome 2025. Thank you.